Joining me today on the Capital TV show, Tibor Nagy, former Assistant Secretary of State for Africa. You are most welcome.
Thank you so much for having me.
I'm going to ask about the recent news on reinstatement from Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, United Arab Emirates, United States of America, and the United Kingdom. They encouraged the political agreement in Sudan, signed on 21st November 2021. How do you see this movement or this initiative?
Sudan has been probably the most difficult and complicated case in sub-Saharan Africa for the last several years. Of course, you know, we have the tragic war in Ethiopia and Tigray, but Sudan, in 2019, of course, we had the events that led to the fall of the Bashir regime. The people were overjoyed. In place, we had a very hybrid government, you know, the military on one side, the civilians on the other. It took a while for the civilians to come to some kind of agreement. Finally, Prime Minister Hamdok, who, in my view, took a huge sacrifice to take on the prime ministership. I cannot think of a more difficult job anywhere in the world. And then, of course, you know, you're supposed to have the transition. People were very frustrated. People in Sudan had extremely high expectations. And then you have the military putting him out the door. The world reacted very angrily. The street reacted very angrily. They brought him back, but then the street remained angry because they thought, okay, Prime Minister's back, so what's different? Does he have any real power, or is he just a puppet of the military? So now the street is out again. Yeah. Everybody's very upset, but the situation's extremely complicated.
This is what you mentioned in one of your tweets. You said a response from Sudanese groups, some accepting, some refusing to participate in the talks, and that indicates level of difficulty involved in any such effort. Hamdok did his best.
Absolutely. You know, I visited Sudan several times when I was Assistant Secretary, and I met with all the groups. It was very clear to me that on one side you had a fairly united military, but even on the military side, you know, you have a little bit of discord between the Sudanese armed forces and the rapid support forces, but they seem to have come to, you know, more or less an agreement. But on the other side, the civilians are extremely divided. The one thing that everybody agreed on was that Bashir must go. Now it seems the only one thing the civilians all agree on is the military needs to go. But there's one thing about wishing for something to happen and another about how do you make it happen. The military has, you know, for decades, they have, it's like a snake. You know, it's like the snake that's around so many different enterprises. The military is completely in so many different businesses. You can't just all of a sudden take a machete and chop that and say, okay, tomorrow you leave. It needs to be done in some kind of an organized way.
Yeah, Ambassador, do you think that there is foreign players in Sudan, they encourage conflict and instability in Sudan? Okay, if you can talk about maybe Turkey is part of this mess?
I'll be honest with you. My impression and all the discussions I ever had was that the foreign players really wanted Sudan to come to peace. Now, of course, the foreign players all have their own interests. Yeah. You know, there are certain countries that would be very comfortable with a military government. There are other countries that really would like to see a civilian government. But
in this situation, what are the Turkish intentions here?
Well, my feeling is that the Turks would be very happy to conduct business in Sudan. Just, you know, the largest Turkish embassy in the world is in Mogadishu. Yeah. In Somalia, because Turkey now is making a very aggressive, you know, push to increase its influence in Africa and to increase business in Africa.
There is an important question about the role of Emiratis and Saudi Arabia in Egypt, Sudan, and Somalia. Is a developmental role in the face of attempts to spread chaos by the Islamic Brotherhood organization that exhausted the economics of this country we're talking about?
Yeah, you know, again, yes, they have deep fundamental disagreements over things like, the Islamic Brotherhood and other forces. But again, the impression I got was in Sudan, everybody had their own interests, but at the end, everybody wanted a stable Sudan. You know, because look at the models they were looking at when this problem started. You have Libya on one hand. Nobody wanted a Libya. In the other part, you have Somalia. Nobody wanted a Somalia. The civilians were not going to tolerate a military dictatorship. The military, the last thing they wanted was chaos, anarchy, and the civilians arguing with each other. And then in Sudan itself, you can't look at Sudan simplistically because there are many Sudans. There's the urban Sudan, but then there's the rural Sudan. There are the people who live along the Nile River, the riverine. But then you have the peripheral regions, the Nuba Mountains, Darfur. So, as I said, it's a very complicated
Let's talk about the humanitarian role of UAE. What can you say about that, about the UAE commitment to maybe help in ending COVID-19? Let's take an example. The UAE aids battle against COVID-19 in Sudan with construction of Sheikh Mohammed bin Zayed Field Hospital.
Yeah, when I was in government, I can no longer speak for the U.S. government because I'm no longer Assistant Secretary. When I was Assistant Secretary, we had an extremely, very, very effective special envoy for Sudan, Ambassador Don Booth. And he basically lived on an airplane, but he made so many trips to the Gulf. And we looked at the UAE then as a source of potential solution for Sudan to help the transition. We talked to everybody. We talked to the UAE, we talked to the Saudis, of course we talked to the Egyptians, talked to the Qataris, we talked to everybody because number one, everybody wanted a positive outcome, but everybody had different roles that they could play in support.
Can you say that the Arab Spring results is one of the most unnecessary war in the Middle East, and especially how that reflects on Horn of Africa?
I can talk about how unfortunately the Arab Spring reflected on Africa, because we have the horrendous problem in the Sahel, Mali, Niger, Chad, Burkina Faso, threatening the coastal states. All of that started out of Libya. When Libya collapsed, all of the weapons and a lot of the mercenaries that were working for Colonel Gaddafi ended up going back to Mali, to Chad, to other places. So unfortunately, yes, everybody had such high hopes when the Arab Spring started, and now it looks like even the last of the dominoes, Tunisia. People are questioning what will be happening in Tunisia. So it has been it's been horribly, horribly disappointing, unfortunately.
President Joe Biden spoke with Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed of Ethiopia to discuss the ongoing conflict and opportunities to advance peace and reconciliation. What it takes to end the suffering and support a stable and united Ethiopia?
As I have said from the day the war started, when I was still Assistant Secretary, peace is not going to come until the participants in the conflict themselves are ready to go to peace. Ethiopians, in my experience, are unique in maintaining what they want to do instead of listening, to what other people are telling them. The rest of the world has been, speaking through megaphones, telling them to stop, ceasefire, have a peace. In Ethiopia, it really doesn't do any good because the people themselves, the leadership of the sides, have to come to the realization that we have to stop. We are at a golden moment right now, and if this passes, then we can look for incredible tragedy down the line. I mean, these days, one study shows that civil wars last an average of 20 years. Can you imagine 20 years of that kind of a destruction? So if they let this moment pass, it's going to be very, very sad for the people of Ethiopia, but also for the people of the Horn of Africa.
I want to quote Ned Price, State Department spokesman, what he said. He said the unconfirmed reports of human rights abuses, atrocities, and destruction of civilian infrastructure in Amhara and Afar by Tigrayan forces underscore the need for all parties to end the violence right now.
Absolutely. In Ethiopia, you have a couple of different tendencies going on. One of the worst is when human rights violations come out from one side or the other side says, yeah, but what about what you did to us? And I call this whataboutism, that nobody says, this is horrible, this is tragic, we did it, full stop.
No one wants to take the responsibility.
Pardon me?
No one wants to take responsibility.
Well, but here's the thing. Everybody commits human rights violations in a war. They've all been well documented. The violations started the violations actually started when the TPLF launched the attack on the Ethiopian National Defense Forces. And from that point on, it was a premeditated attack. The Ethiopians responded. The Eritreans came across. We had the human rights violations starting almost immediately, credible by Eritrean forces in Aksum, and then it went on and on and on and on and on and on, and it's going on today. As you see with reports of bombings by the Ethiopians in parts of Tigray, and they just go on and on. It's madness. I have called this one of the most needless wars in history. It's absolute madness.
Ambassador Nagy, where the United States stands in the conflict between Ethiopia and Egypt?
Great Ethiopian Renaissance. I've made a couple of points in that.
Right.
When I was in government, when I was in the U.S. government, President Trump clearly favored the Egyptian point of view. That goes without saying. He did. But the Biden administration has taken a much more neutral stance. Again, I'm not speaking for the U.S. government. Here's the bottom line. The dam is going to be built. The sides have to agree on this. They have come to this with different philosophical approaches. The Egyptian point of view is totally different than the Ethiopian one. The Sudanese have been caught in the middle and they have gone back and forth. Initially they were supporting the Ethiopians, now they seem to be supporting. The bottom line is the dam's going to be built. Ethiopia now is very much preoccupied, obviously, with the conflict in Tigray. But they will, my prediction is they will come together, they will come to an agreement because they have to.
There will not be any military confrontation.
No, absolutely not. I mean, you can't just destroy a dam. Yeah. What would it be like saying, okay, if the Egyptians attack the Grand Renaissance Dam, then do the Ethiopians attack the Aswan Dam? I mean, can you imagine? That kind of a thing.
During your tenure, how was the collaboration between USA and Saudi Arabia in Horn of Africa, or your expertise?
Well, again, I'm not an expert on the Middle East, but it was our Middle East Bureau that dealt with Saudi Arabia. But we absolutely conducted consultations, on because the Gulf has. Yeah, absolutely positive, because the Gulf has such interest. I mean, they're looking at the coast of Africa. East Africa is looking at the Gulf. More and more other outside people are also looking. You mentioned Turkey, of course. We also have China.
Can we mention Iranian, the Mullah regime?
In East Africa, we've had problems from the Iranians. We have absolutely had some, terrorist problems from the Iranians, like we do everywhere else.
My last question, you take on President Biden's recent democracy summit in Lubbock Avalanche Journal titled, Biden's summit, was it democracy or hypocrisy?
Yes, it was hypocrisy.
Why?
Because, as I mentioned, there are a number of countries that are quite democratic, that were not invited, and then there were countries that were invited that are not at all democratic. You know, you look at the Freedom House has that, you know, that scorecard of various, and you look at some of the countries that were invited and they were not at all democratic. And then they invited Taiwan, but the representative of Taiwan was speaking, and the representative had a map in the back that showed Taiwan in a different color than China, and then all of a sudden the picture disappeared. Yeah. You know, they only had the audio. I mean, you know, being in media, how that goes. So someone pulled the plug on that. So unfortunately, I think if you're going to do a summit on democracy, then invite all of the countries in the world that, number one, are making progress on democracy, are democracies, or absolutely honestly want to be democracies, instead of being very selective.
Maybe this is your advice for Biden administration policy toward...
My advice to any administration is to not be hypocrites.
All right. Ambassador Tibor Nagy, former Assistant Secretary of State for Africa, thank you. I'm so glad to have you on my show.
Thank you very, very much. I really appreciate the time.
Hey, Maria Malouf here. Please click to like and subscribe to Maria Malouf TV YouTube page and catch our hottest interviews and most compelling analysis. You will not get it anywhere else.